A quick warning, this episode contains references to sexual abuse of a minor. Please use discretion. This is a case that you've most likely heard of, but do you know what happened? I didn't for a long time, but I do now. This is a story of privilege, luxury, abuse, and betrayal, all set in the fabulously wealthy suburb of Beverly Hills. I'm Reagan Snyder, and this is the story of none other than the Menendez Brothers. Mark Jackson played basketball professionally for the New York Knicks in the late 80s and early 90s. As such, he is immortalized on an NBA trading card. At first glance, it looks like a typical trading card featuring an action shot of Jackson passing a basketball to a teammate with a crowd of spectators behind him. You wouldn't think anything of it unless you knew who Lyle and Erik Menendez were, because among the spectators were the brothers sitting courtside watching the game just months before being arrested for a heinous crime. Jose Menendez was born and raised in Havana, Cuba by a soccer player dad with an accounting firm and a star swimmer for a mom. He had two older sisters, and as the only boy and youngest child of the family, Jose was spoiled by his mother. He would develop a reputation and become a bit of a bully. He didn't respect his parents, and they found it hard to control him as he got older. Around the time Jose was a teenager, things started to become unsafe in Cuba, and his parents sent him to live in the United States alone when he was 16 years old. He settled in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, where he lived in a cousin's attic. Jose was a proficient swimmer, much like his mother, and after high school, he attended Southern Illinois University on an athletic scholarship. While he was there, he met a beautiful former beauty queen named Mary Louise Anderson, also known as Kitty. The two of them got married while they were still very young in 1963, and together they moved to New York. Jose worked as a dishwasher part-time while he pursued a degree in accounting at Queens College. During this time, Kitty was working as a teacher, but in 1968, she gave birth to their first son, Joseph Lyle, who would go on to just be known by his middle name, and Kitty quit her job to stay home with him. Jose and Kitty decided to move their little family from New York to New Jersey. Shortly after their arrival in New Jersey, their second son, Erik, was born in 1970. Jose decided to make a big shift in his career and entered the music industry. He became the top executive at RCA Records, who signed artists like Duran Duran, Eurythmics, and the boy band Menudo. By now, Jose was making great money and wanted to live accordingly, so he moved his family to Princeton, New Jersey, into a $1 million estate. Lyle and Erik went to a prestigious private school called Princeton Day School. Jose set expectations for his sons to excel academically and athletically. Kitty made it a point to attend the boys' athletic events and support them in every area of their lives. Both Lyle and Erik took up tennis. Their parents spent a lot of money on tennis lessons for them, and they spent a lot of their time practicing. By all accounts, the family seemed to be the picture of a perfect, functional family living the American dream. In 1986, Jose made another shift in his career and left RCA to pursue a role in the movie industry. He knew that he couldn't stay in New Jersey if he wanted to make this happen, and so the Menendez family packed up and headed to Calabasas, California, and moved into a home that sat on 13 acres of property. In 1987, Jose landed a position at Live Entertainment. It was a new company, and it was already on the path to failure. Just the year before, they'd lost over $20 million. But Jose was confident that he could save the company. Jose was known to do whatever it took to succeed in business, and he had no problem implementing ruthless business tactics. During his first year at Live Entertainment, he increased their profits by $8 million and doubled that by the following year to $16 million. Shortly after joining Live Entertainment, Jose became the CEO of the company. His salary started out at $500,000 annually with up to $860,000 in bonuses. The company had life insurance policies on Jose and other top employees, with the company itself listed as the beneficiary. There was also a second policy in place for the families of the employees as beneficiaries. Although Jose was good at making money for the company, he had a bad reputation at work, especially among women. His business practices tended to be shady, and he was involved in several affairs with different women in the office. People assumed that Kitty knew about the affairs, but chose to turn a blind eye in an attempt to keep the family together, and because she wasn't willing to give up living in the lap of luxury. Jose was ashamed of his Cuban heritage and the fact that he didn't attend a prestigious university. He tried to keep this part of his history hidden from the people he worked with. This mindset translated into the pressure that he put on his sons to achieve perfection. He wanted them to attend an Ivy League school, namely Princeton, but both of his sons were just average students. They did, however, excel in tennis. Erik especially, who placed 44th in the nation for players 18 and under. Needless to say, their dad was hard on them. Jose was especially hard on Lyle, being the oldest, but both Lyle and Erik's relationship with their dad suffered. Jose put a lot of pressure on Lyle and would even shame his appearance. When Lyle was 14, he started to lose his hair, and so Jose made him wear a toupee. But Lyle and Erik were very close, and it seemed like they were a package deal. If you wanted to be friends with one, you had to be friends with both. But their friends knew the brothers to be sneaky and ruthless when it came to obtaining whatever it was that they wanted, which they of course learned from Jose. They were taught by their father that money was the be-all end-all, as was success and always coming in first place. They tried to make their dad happy, but it just never seemed to be enough. They never felt good enough for him. As they got older, Erik fell in with the wrong crowd. He ended up pulling Lyle into this circle of friends, and the brothers started to rebel. Together with their friends, they broke into a friend's home to steal the contents in a safe that they knew about. It wasn't about the money or the possessions for Erik and Lyle. They had everything they could ever want. For them, it was about the experience and the rush that they got from stealing. Because of this, they planned another break-in, but this time it would just be the two of them, Erik and Lyle. During this robbery, they stole $100,000. When their friends found out about what they'd done, one of them ratted them out in retaliation for being pushed out of the scheme. When Jose learned about what they'd done, he wasn't mad at them for committing a crime. No, he was mad at them for getting caught. The boys said that it was all just a big joke. They did it as a joke, and Jose took matters into his own hands and tried to pay the people involved off to not press charges, but this did not work. By now, Lyle had gotten into Princeton and he was set to start soon, so Jose came up with a way to keep him out of prison. He put all the blame on Erik since he was still a minor and figured he would get a lesser punishment. In the end, Erik was ordered to community service and therapy, as well as paying the $100,000 back plus $11,000 in damages. Around this time, the Menendez family moved into a famous multi-million-dollar home in Beverly Hills, once owned by people like Elton John and Michael Jackson. It was a beautiful Mediterranean-style home that consisted of over 9,000 square feet, 7 bedrooms, a pool, a guest house, and, of course, a tennis court. Lyle set off for Princeton, where he would be studying business, but of course he didn't take it seriously. He fell into the party scene and skipped class, and in turn his grades suffered, and after being caught plagiarizing, Jose tried to pay the dean off. But the dean was not having any of it, and Lyle was suspended from Princeton for a year. And again, Jose was mad, but he wasn't mad at Lyle. Being the king of not ever taking responsibility, Jose was mad at the university for suspending his son. Because of Jose's lack of accountability, Erik and Lyle never took responsibility for their actions, and they always played the victim. Now that Lyle was on suspension from school, Jose gave him a job at Live Entertainment. But Lyle had a terrible work ethic and hated working, which led to his poor performance and ultimately getting fired from the company. During all of this, Erik was still in high school. He was still playing tennis, but he had also become interested in acting and writing. Together with his friend Craig, he co-wrote a screenplay called Friends about a young man who murders his wealthy parents to inherit their money. Jose didn't show any real interest or pride in his sons. In fact, he was disappointed by the way that they turned out and considered altering his will to either cut his sons out completely or at least limit their access to his money. Lyle and Erik knew about this, and it led to a lot of tension within the family. On August 19th, 1989, Lyle was 21 and Erik was 18. Tensions were high as ever, but Jose and Kitty chartered a yacht to take the family shark fishing at Marina del Rey. The tension was so thick that even the yacht's crew could feel it. They noticed that the brothers didn't even want to be near their parents, and they spent their time at the other end of the yacht, away from Kitty and Jose. The next day, August 20th, 1989, would be the day that their lives would change forever. Lyle and Erik decided to go see a movie, while Kitty and Jose opted to stay in and watch a movie at home in their den. Around 10 p.m., the brothers burst in through the doors of the den holding shotguns. Lyle shot Jose 6 times, including a fatal blow to the head. Erik, who was supposed to be in charge of taking out Kitty, froze. This gave Kitty enough time to run out of the room and into the hallway before Lyle followed her out and shot at her, hitting her leg. The gunshot to the leg shattered her bone and she fell to the floor. At this point, they were out of ammunition, and Lyle ran outside to reload his shotgun. During this time, a very injured Kitty tried to get up off of the floor and run away, but she slipped in her own blood. By this time, Lyle was back inside, and she was shot in the face, which killed her. In total, she was shot 10 times, which included shots to the arm, leg, chest, and face. In an effort to make the crime scene look like a mob hit, they shot her in the knees, which is a violent action known as kneecapping. After murdering their parents, they called 911 to report that someone had killed them. They stayed in the house until police arrived, and then they ran out of the house screaming and appeared to be completely traumatized. Erik even went so far as to collapse on the lawn while he was screaming, and he was shaking and hyperventilating. The police went inside to find an absolute horror scene. They questioned the brothers, who told authorities that they had gone to see Batman before going to the Taste of LA festival, and then they came home to find a bloodbath and their parents deceased. Lyle and Erik's version of events appeared to be so credible that their hands were not even tested for gunshot residue. One of the brothers mentioned that they thought it might be a mob hit, and investigators did look into this theory, but it just didn't check out, and they had to move on to a new theory to investigate. It wasn't a secret that Jose had a lot of enemies, especially at work, so police interviewed his coworkers and his employees, but again, they were left with nothing. Upon finding out that Kitty and Jose had been murdered, their community was shocked, especially at Kitty's murder. She was known around town to be a very warm and friendly person, and she was well liked by her neighbors. People were naturally scared, and they were racking their brains trying to figure out who could have possibly done this, but no one ever suspected that it was Lyle and Erik. Throughout the investigation, the boys took to appearing devastated and scared for their own lives. They opted to stay in hotels just in case the killer came back to the house, and even hired bodyguards and started wearing bulletproof vests, all on live entertainment's dime. The hotel bill itself was $8,800 for a 5-day stay, $2,000 of which was just for room service. But considering the emotional state that the boys appeared to be in, people found it odd that they immediately began to spend their parents' money. Before the funeral even took place, Lyle went on a shopping spree and purchased a whole bunch of nice clothing and 3 Rolex watches. He showed up to his parents' funeral completely decked out in very nice clothes, including one of his new Rolexes. He spoke at the funeral for 30 minutes, recalling how much his parents had meant to him. Erik, however, was too upset to speak at all. Their spending spree continued after the funeral. Lyle had a particular interest in investing the money into businesses. He bought a place called Chuck's Spring Street Cafe, which was a buffalo wing restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey, for $500,000, which he planned to franchise. He also started a new company called Menendez Investment Enterprises and hired his friends from Princeton. He rented a space for $3,000 a month in a Princeton shopping mall and got it all furnished with expensive items, but he never actually got the business off the ground and moved into the space. But all business and no play is for boring boys, so he got a Porsche Carrera for good measure. He also picked up a gambling habit and lost a lot of money that way. Meanwhile, Erik had hired a full-time tennis coach to pursue his dream of becoming a tennis pro, and he bought a Jeep Wrangler. They both bought expensive clothes, they traveled overseas to places like the Caribbean and London, and they ate at expensive restaurants. When it came to their living situation, they decided that they didn't want to stay in the Beverly Hills house. Instead, they got adjoining condos in Marina del Rey, leaving the mansion unused. In the 6 months following the murders, Lyle and Erik had collectively spent over $700,000, which in today's money would be $1.5 million. They would have spent more, but they didn't have access to the funds. Jose's estate was worth around $14 million plus the $5 million for life insurance, and his sons were set to inherit all of it. But authorities were catching on to their strange behavior. It wasn't lost on them that as time went on, the brothers were hardly interested in the investigation and catching their parents' killers. Initially, the brothers were written off as suspects right off the bat, but investigators decided that it was time to take a look into them and their alibis. Upon investigating Lyle and Erik, they found two very suspicious pieces of evidence. Not only had they hired a computer expert to wipe the family's hard drive, which contained Jose's updated will, but 2 days before the murders took place, they had purchased 2 shotguns from a Big Five in San Diego. Shotguns that matched the murder weapons. Investigators reached out to Erik's friend Craig, who he had co-written that screenplay with, and he had a ton of information. According to Craig, he had gone over to the Menendez residence shortly after the murders had taken place, and Erik gave him all of the details. He told Craig that their plan was for Lyle to shoot Jose and Erik would shoot Kitty, but Erik wasn't able to go through with it, and so Lyle shot Kitty too. Investigators asked Craig to meet up with Erik while wearing a wire so that they could get his story on tape, and he actually agreed to it. Craig arranged a dinner meeting with Erik, but at the dinner he was unable to get Erik to say anything incriminating. He told Craig that he had been lying about what he told him, and that he and Lyle had nothing to do with their parents' murders. Erik continued to see the family's therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, after the murders, and Dr. Oziel suspected that the brothers had something to do with it. Erik was showing signs of severe stress and anxiety, even developing ulcers, so Dr. Oziel tried to keep their appointments very casual while simultaneously trying to get a confession from them, even taking their appointments outside to walk around as they talked. During one of these appointments, as they approached the office building, Erik leaned up against a parking meter and said, "We did it. We killed our parents." Erik told Oziel all about Billionaire Boys Club and how he and Lyle had watched it together and were inspired by it. Billionaire Boys Club was a 2-part TV movie about a group of boys in Beverly Hills who kill one of the boys' wealthy father for his money. In it, they wear Rolexes and drive a Jeep Wrangler. Erik told Dr. Oziel everything. He told him that after the murder, they changed into clean clothes, dumped the shotguns up the road, and got a movie ticket to use as an alibi. After Erik's confession, Dr. Oziel told Erik to call Lyle and have him meet them at the office. Lyle agreed, having no idea that Dr. Oziel knew everything or what he was even walking into. Dr. Oziel's plan was to help them navigate the situation while secretly recording everything. He arranged to have his mistress, Judalon Smith, listen through the door, prepared to call the police should anything go awry. Lyle showed up, and when he found out that Erik had told everything to Dr. Oziel, he freaked out and threatened the doctor that he would kill him if he told anyone about what they'd done. Over the course of several sessions, Dr. Oziel was able to secretly capture all the details of the crime. But he didn't go to the police with the tapes. Instead, he just sat on them. It wasn't until Judalon Smith, his mistress, went to the police and told them everything. She and Dr. Oziel had a falling out, and she claimed that he was abusive, and so she retaliated by taking this information to the police. The tapes were subpoenaed, and authorities now had plenty to arrest Erik and Lyle. They got word that Lyle was planning to flee the country, and so the arrest was expedited. On March 8th of 1990, police got Lyle while he was pulling out of his driveway. He was instructed out of his vehicle and put into handcuffs right there on his lawn. They learned that Erik was out of the country in Israel for a tennis tournament, and they called him to tell him that he needed to come home immediately. Erik did go back to the United States immediately, but he didn't fly to Los Angeles immediately. Instead, he flew to Miami, Florida to stay with some relatives, and it was his aunt who finally convinced him that he needed to go back to Los Angeles and surrender. Erik flew into LAX on March 10th, 1990, and surrendered right there at the airport. When word got out that it was Erik and Lyle who had committed the murders, their community was absolutely stunned. And although the crime was heinous, they still had close friends and family on their side supporting them. When the brothers showed up for their arraignment, they were wearing their best suits and cocky expressions and pled not guilty. The California Supreme Court was tasked with determining whether Dr. Oziel's tapes were court admissible or if they were in violation of doctor-patient confidentiality. It was determined that 2 of the 3 tapes would be admissible, including the one that contained Lyle's confession. This was because in threatening Dr. Oziel, Lyle forfeited his right to doctor-patient confidentiality. In July of 1993, the case took a wild turn that stunned everyone involved. The brothers announced that, yes, they did murder their parents, but it was in self-defense after a lifetime of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse at the hands of their father, Jose. They claimed that while Kitty did not abuse them the way that their father did, she knew about it, and she just let it happen. Therefore, she had to die alongside her husband. On July 20th, 1993, the highly publicized trial of the Menendez brothers began. The trials were separate, with 2 defense teams and 2 juries, but they were done simultaneously. It was broadcasted live, and people watched anxiously as the events of the trials unfolded. The public was very invested and very divided in their thoughts and opinions about all of it. During the trial, Lyle was portrayed as the ringleader and mastermind behind the crime. Their grandmother, Jose's mom, Maria Menendez, supported her grandsons through the entire trial. She was either in denial or just a great supporter, but she still believed that the mob was responsible for the murders. Lyle and Erik obviously had a hard time in jail. They were 2 privileged rich boys from Beverly Hills, and their fellow inmates hated them. And so their grandmother, Maria, paid for protection for them. Prosecutors were aiming to get the death penalty, and they painted Erik and Lyle's motive to be financial gain. Their defense teams presented the brothers to be abused and in danger, claiming that they killed in defense out of fear for their lives. Leslie Abramson, who represented them, described the sexual abuse from their father that they were forced to endure, while Kitty just stood by and watched. Jose was described to be a cruel perfectionist and a pedophile, while Kitty was described as an enabling, selfish, mentally unstable alcoholic and drug addict who encouraged her husband's poor behavior while also being violent toward her sons. Leslie shared a traumatizing instance from Lyle's childhood where he woke up to find his pet rabbit's head had been bashed in by Jose and Kitty. This messed with Lyle so badly that he wet the bed until he was 14, which his parents shamed him for. She said that Kitty also blamed the boys for being unable to have a successful career in broadcasting and threatened to poison them at one point. All of these experiences, among others, led to Lyle and Erik fearing their mother. The alleged sexual abuse also began in their childhood.
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress.
Where would this take place?
In my bedroom.
And how often would this happen?
Like 2 or 3 times a week.
And for how long did this happen?
Not too long. began to change.
When did it begin to change?
I'm not sure exactly at what time, but almost close to when I was 7.
And how did it change?
Just became more involved.
As a child, did you ever tell anybody else what had happened with your dad?
Yes. As a child, no.
Why not?
I was afraid, and my dad didn't want me to.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was our secret, that bad things would happen to me if I told anybody.
Erik claimed that Kitty would give him quote-unquote genital exams until he was 15 years old. When Lyle found out about Erik's sexual abuse at the hands of Jose, Lyle threatened to tell Jose's secret, and in response, he said to Lyle, "He's my son. I'll do whatever I want." And so after years of all types of abuse, Lyle and Erik decided that they needed to kill their parents in order to save themselves. They were afraid that Jose would kill them to avoid having his dirty laundry aired. The boys testified that Jose would rape them, sometimes using objects. They went on to describe the horrifying, graphic details of the sexual abuse that they endured through tears, but the public largely did not believe them. But it wasn't just Erik and Lyle who testified about the sexual abuse. Their cousin, Diane Vandermolen, testified that Lyle had told her when they were around 8 years old that he was being molested. Erik had also written a letter to his cousin Andy back in 1988 about the sexual abuse, which said, quote, "I've been trying to avoid Dad. It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. I'm afraid. He's crazy. He's warned me 100 times about telling anyone, especially Lyle," end quote. The trial went on to last for 4.5 months before finally coming to a close in January of 1994. The juries were divided by gender, and they deliberated for about a month. In the end, the women wanted to acquit, and the men wanted to convict, which resulted in a mistrial. Lyle and Erik were retried in October of 1995, this time with one jury and no media present. Another difference between this trial and their last was that the judge did not allow them to talk as extensively about the sexual abuse. In this trial, Dr. Oziel's testimony lasted 6 days. The defense tried to discredit him as a liar and a cheater, suggesting that he planned to use the tapes as blackmail. 2 of his mistresses had filed complaints against him, and the state recommended that he lose his license. Erik's testimony would go on for 6 weeks, during which he would claim that his father was a killer and that Erik feared for his own life. During his testimony, though, Erik was caught in a lie when he claimed to have bought pistols 3 years prior to the murder for protection. This obviously did not bode well for Erik. The prosecutors would go on to ask the jury if he could lie about something like this, then what else could he lie about? And Lyle, he didn't testify at all. And once the retrial came to a close, the jury deliberated for nearly 3 weeks before arriving at a unanimous verdict. Lyle and Erik Menendez were found guilty of 2 counts, first-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. Before their sentencing, the brothers got one final word out to the public when they were interviewed by Barbara Walters.
Do you think the media has portrayed you fairly? Can you tell?
I don't know if anyone can be portrayed fairly in the media, who they are.
Well, let me say it. There are people, a great number of people, who think that you two are spoiled brats, that you are evil, that you are monsters. What do you say to them?
That's not who I am, but I can't defend that. Because I came from a family of wealth, it doesn't make me spoiled.
I would be surprised if anybody that was present at that trial and saw the whole thing rather than snippets on the news would feel that.
A jury found you both guilty.
Right, but I don't think you aren't guilty because they found you spoiled.
Or evil.
Or evil.
Just a normal, I'm just a normal kid.
Oh, Erik, you're a normal kid who killed your parents.
Yeah, I know.
And you still say you're a normal kid?
Well, I didn't have normal experiences, but I am. I did that, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about what happened and wish that I could take that moment back or change what happened. But it's hard to live with that.
Do you feel remorse?
Tremendous remorse.
The death penalty ended up being taken off the table since neither Lyle nor Erik had any history of violence, but the jury did not believe that this crime was committed in self-defense. On July 2nd, 1996, both brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Erik and Lyle, who were always so close to each other, were sent to separate prisons and wouldn't see each other again for decades. In May of 1998, they tried to get the Supreme Court to review their case, but their request was denied. Their last appeal denial was in 2005, and as of today, they are still in prison. Both of the brothers would get married in prison. Anna Erickson had started writing to Lyle during the trial, and he responded. Their regular communication resulted in Lyle proposing to Anna on the phone, and on July 2nd, 1996, the same day he was sentenced, Lyle married Anna in a ceremony over the phone. Their romance did not last long, though. Anna found out that he was cheating on her in prison. He was writing other women, and they divorced after 5 years of marriage in April of 2001. In November of 2003, Lyle would remarry a woman named Rebecca Sneed, who was also a pen pal that he'd known for about 10 years prior to their engagement. Tammy Sackelman was one of the thousands who had written to Erik. She discovered that her husband Chuck had allegedly been raping their 15-year-old daughter. Chuck turned himself in, but then he committed suicide 2 days later. Tammy also had a 9-month-old daughter with Chuck, and in her grief, she reached out to Erik for comfort. Tammy and Erik would continue to write letters back and forth to each other before finally meeting in person 4 years later. Tammy had plans to use her inheritance from Chuck's death to move to Georgia with her young daughter and start anew, but she changed her plans after meeting Erik. Instead, she moved to Sacramento to be closer to Erik and would visit him in prison 4 times a week. On June 12, 1999, Erik and Tammy got married at Folsom State Prison in a prison waiting room with a Twinkie serving as their wedding cake. Due to California laws, neither brother was allowed conjugal visits as inmates with life sentences. Tammy says that the lack of a sex life is not a problem for her because she's emotionally attached to Erik. In 2018, the brothers were transferred to the same prison. It had been 22 years since the last time they saw each other, and they hugged and cried when they were finally reunited. Just recently, in May of 2023, the Menendez brothers requested a new hearing based on newly discovered evidence which allegedly proves that their father had also molested Roy Rossello. Roy Rossello was a member of the boy band Menudo, which was signed to RCA during Jose's time with the company. Roy stated that when he was 14 years old, he was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez while visiting the Menendez home in New Jersey. He'd had a glass of wine and then felt like he had no control over his body. Jose took him into a room where he would rape him. One of the Menendez attorneys, Cliff Gardner, says based on this new evidence, they should have been convicted of manslaughter, which carries a much lighter sentence than first-degree murder. A judge has yet to rule in the case with their most recent petition, and so Erik and Lyle Menendez sit in prison awaiting a response. Thank you for listening to this episode. I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Do you think Lyle and Erik killed in self-defense? Or do you think that they're just cold-blooded killers who wanted their parents' money? Send me a DM on Instagram, or if you're listening on Spotify, you can leave a comment down beneath the episode. If you like this show, please share it with your family and friends and give it a 5-star review. It really helps independent podcasts like mine to grow. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.